Matthew chapter 16. And I have our typical layout for this. So if you want to take a look at Matthew chapter 16, we'll start right at the beginning, and we're going to just go through to verse 12 for now. Yeah, now one thing that I want you to notice here and perhaps start thinking about, because I'm going to have you take a look at this in a few minutes, is that this section right here, verses 5 through 12, I'm pretty confident that there's a really interesting chiastic structure in here. And so be on the lookout for that and start to think about it. In a few minutes when we get to that section, we're going to kind of talk about that. But I think that you're going to find a menorah pattern, a really interesting chiastic structure right in that section right there. So the first thing I want to do is just read to you from here this section. Now, when the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to test Yeshua, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He said, "When evening comes, you say it will be fair weather because the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be stormy today because the sky is red and darkening. You know how to judge correctly the appearance of the sky, but you cannot evaluate the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah." Then he left them and went away. When the disciples went to the other side, they forgot to take bread. "Watch out," Yeshua said to them. "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." So they began to discuss among themselves, saying, "It is because we brought no bread." When Yeshua learned of this, he said, "You have such little faith. Why are you arguing among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you took up? How could you not understand that I was not speaking to you about bread? But beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood that he had not told them to be on guard against the yeast in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So this is an interesting section. And the first question that I have for you is, why do you think it would be a test for Yeshua? Why would they ask, how would that be a temptation or a test for Yeshua? In what way is them asking for a sign a test or a temptation for him?
Well, he didn't believe anyway. They only wanted a sign, but even if he gave it, they wouldn't believe it.
Yeah? Keith?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, that the fact that they keep wanting, instead of having faith and seeing everything he's done up till now, they keep asking for something more and more miraculous. But as far as the Pharisees go, he already reads their hearts. He knows what they're about.
Yeah. And I think we've discussed previously about how he's obviously doing a lot of signs and wonders. But remember that constantly throughout this book of Matthew, we keep seeing a parallel, a dichotomy, if you want, between the spiritual and the fleshly. And that the signs that he is doing is healing. And all of those healings have a spiritual component about being blind, being deaf, having a leprous disease, or being unable to speak. But it seems to me that they are asking for a sign that is just like a sign from heaven, something a little bit more grand.
Bring fire down or something.
They're asking for him to glorify himself. I think that's a good idea. That's a good way to look at it. Bring glory to yourself by doing something miraculous that is not for someone else. Just to show us your power. That might be a temptation.
I think the most signs what he did, the healings and even reading in the temple, were all also mainly fulfillments, right? From the Old Testament to show, okay, I am the one because I fulfill everything.
He's doing what the Father told him to do.
Exactly. It's not so much from, I'm going to do more and more.
This would have been him doing what the Pharisees asked him to do in order to glorify himself.
Right.
Instead of doing what the Father did to glorify the Father.
Yeah. Jerry?
It's like the 3 temptations in the wilderness. I think the last one just said jump off the building. And God will not, the Father will not allow your feet to hit the ground or get hurt or whatever.
Right.
In other words, prove to me by showing off your powers that you're the Messiah.
Right.
This is what they want. This is, they wanted to see this. They couldn't care less about salvation or
Right.
kingdom of God. They just wanted miracles.
Yeah, seems like it. Seems like it. Yeah, there's certainly, and I can see now from this perspective that we're talking about how that is like a test, just like Hasatan tempted him, to show us your power. If you have this power, do this stuff for yourself. And I think that's the unifying factor, is that when the tempter was tempting him, it was use your power to help yourself. And in all of the miracles that he's done so far, he's not done one thing for himself. He is always healing others. And like I said, there's a spiritual component to each of those healings. And in this case, yeah, that's like they're being tempted. And it's not, I don't think, for no reason that right in the next section, Peter gets slapped around a little bit and says, get behind me, Satan. Because he's looking after the things of man instead of the things of the kingdom of Elohim. And this is just another example of that, operating in the flesh, which is such a really key component to this book. And we're going to continue to see it over and over and over.
Are you going to talk about that word in Hebrew?
Oat, a sign, yeah. You know that in Hebrew, if you're looking at many of you look at the Hebrew copy of this Gospel of Matthew, and it might say that a wicked and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, which is oat from the first book in the Genesis. You want to mention something regarding that?
I thought you were. I was just holding it.
No, I'm just going for you.
Oh. Oat is spelled with the olive and the tav, and in the middle there's a vav, which kind of looks like a guy standing up looking this way.
Let's
And-
tilt it forward just a little bit. Okay.
Okay, and this is actually two different words in Hebrew. It can be pronounced, it's spelled the same, but it can be pronounced oat, or it can be pronounced avat. Okay, and that is when this here, when it has a dot above it, it just makes an O sound, and so then you use your oat or oath, and or it can be pronounced as a V sound, and so it would say avat. So when the man-looking letter, when the man is silent, you have oat or a sign. When the man speaks and says his v of avat, it's lust or desire.
That's an interesting insight, especially considering what we were just talking about here, that Hebrew word oat can also be pronounced avot, which is lust, concerning how the letter in the center, which kind of looks like a man, whether he's speaking or keeping his mouth shut.
Just one vowel pointing will change the meaning.
Yeah,
Right.
but in the they don't have.
But in
vowel pointing.
Paleo Hebrew, they don't have any
You would
vowel
just
pointing, so
be
there
able
could.
to infer it from the context,
Right.
whether it was lust or sign.
But Strong's doesn't tell you all that.
No.
That's a strong one.
No, but Angie does.
Goodies, you gotta uncover here.
So yeah, thank you, Angela, for pointing that out. Looking at my next point here, again, Yeshua is contrasting their earthly or fleshly understanding of things with more spiritual concepts, and he indicates that they can correctly translate earthly indications but not spiritual ones. For what exactly is he rebuking them? He's saying, you guys can tell whether it's going to rain tomorrow by the way the sky looks. You've heard that, sailor's delight, red sky at night kind of thing. It's the same exact thing. Being able to tell whether it's going to, you're good at predicting the weather, but you are blind to the signs of the times. Why is he speaking against him on that? Go ahead, sir. Not Jerry. Sorry, Jerry. There's a guy behind
He
you.
actually just said it with the signs of the times. And I think, I don't remember where, but he spoke to the Pharisees before about you did not know of the time of visitation.
Right.
And that's the problem. And
Right.
it feeds into what everybody else has already said about they're not recognizing all the things that he's doing.
Right.
recognizing the times of the visitation.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is that when we first started to study this book, we went through and talked about Herod and the Magi, the Eastern magic people, whoever the divination people who came through, and we talked about the signs that Daniel had spoken about and per Daniel's prophecies about the timing of the Messiah arriving on the scene. And we noted that there was a big religious fervor during that time looking for the Messiah. So what's curious to me is knowing that information. Now remember though that was during the time of his birth, and he is now approximately 30, somewhere around there. And so it's been 30 years. Do you think that the religious fervor has died down? I mean, aren't they still looking for this Messiah? And why is he rebuking them, saying you cannot evaluate the signs of the times? What is he talking about? Grace?
I don't know, but I understand, read somewhere that it was during that time that there were people already claiming to be the Messiah too, around that time.
Yeah.
So they knew when to expect, and then more or less in their maybe culture, they would know that he would come out when he's about 30 and be teaching and making miracles, stuff like those.
Yeah.
But they added something about him being the king who would free them from the Romans, and that is what the other messiahs were doing. He was the only one who was doing the miracles.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think, we know that our blessed brothers of the Jewish race or Jewish persuasion, however you want to term that, have still misunderstood the dual role of the Messiah. That we have, they think there's two Messiahs, Messiah ben Yosef, Messiah ben David. And according to just the next section that we're about to read, he has to correct the apostles about their own misunderstanding, because right after this he starts telling them, I'm going to go and be killed and crucified and then raised from the dead. And they're like, whoa, what are you talking about? That's not how this works. But they're definitely having problems balancing these two parts of the scripture, which seem to indicate two different types of a Messiah, or they're still stumbling over that today, unfortunately. But I want you to also consider this concept from Deuteronomy chapter 18, which is tied in with this. And I'd like you to take a look at Deuteronomy 18, because I think you'll see something very interesting in relation to this. If you look at Deuteronomy chapter 18, starting at verse 15, it says this. It says, Yehovah, your Elohim, will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brothers. Listen to him. According to all that you asked of Yehovah, your Elohim, in Horeb, in the day of the assembly, or the day of the church, saying, let me not hear again the voice of Yehovah, my Elohim, nor let me see this great fire anymore, lest I die. And Yehovah said to me, what they have spoken is good. I shall raise up for them a prophet like you out of the midst of their brothers, and I shall put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And it shall be, the man who does not listen to my words which he speaks in my name, I will require it of him. Now that really is a clear cut, to me, that's one of the prophecies of the Messiah. A prophet like Moses, who is going to be raised up, and he will speak my words, exactly what I tell him to speak. And you must listen to him. And the person who does not listen to him, I myself will require it of him. Meaning, you're going to pay me if you fail to hear this prophet that I'm going to raise up in the midst of you from your own brethren. And remember what Angela talked about just a couple of weeks ago regarding respecting father and mother. And what that term seems to mean, kaved, talking about lightly esteeming them, not putting much gravity into what they're saying. The same concept is being applied here to the Messiah. You must give great weight, kaved, to what he says, because I will require it of you if you do not. And so, they are treating him with contempt and esteeming him lightly. Jerry?
In one of the synagogues that he went, I don't know if it was the first one or not, he opened up to Isaiah 61.
Yes.
And he read about half of what was in there.
Right.
And said something to the effect that this has been fulfilled, or you're saying this fulfilled right now.
Right.
And if I remember the story correctly, they tried to throw him off a cliff about 5 minutes later.
That's true. Yes.
They didn't
They knew
really.
what he was
They,
saying.
they knew what he was talking about, but they did not.
Obviously
wasn't
did not
accepting
buy
him as the
it.
Messiah.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
then one of the
Absolutely.
disciples asked him later down the road, "Are you the prophet?"
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, he looks like him. He smells like him.
Right,
Is he really
right.
the prophet?
Yeah, and we're coming to that again, and the fact that when they approached John the Baptist, they were saying to him, "Who are you? Are you Elijah, or are you the prophet?" So they're this idea of the prophet is a very interesting thing. If you look in the Mishnah and the Talmud, the prophet is a bit of a mysterious kind of figure, and some of them equate him with the Mashiach, some of them do not. So that's an interesting thing.
But does the word prophet to them, did it mean the same, synonymous with Messiah? Or somebody with not quite there?
Yeah, a prophet to
Visionary,
them.
but not the Messiah.
Right, yeah. And I think that to the Jewish mind, my understanding, of course, is that a prophet is to us very different than it is to them. I mean, when we think prophecy, we're talking somebody who tells the future. And yes, there's certainly that element to it. In fact, God says just right after that, what I just read about, that's one of the signs that you'll be able to tell whether it's a true prophet or not, and whether what he predicts comes true. But even so, I might give him the power to predict something will come true, and he'll speak false words in order to test you. But our understanding of it is almost strictly related to, foretelling future events. But to the Jewish mind, a prophet is simply someone who is receiving direct revelation, is basically the most basic way that I would be able to put it. And so there is no person greater than the Messiah Yeshua for receiving direct revelation from God. He says himself, "I speak nothing unless I have heard it from my Father."
But the Jewish people, the Jewish faith, they believe in prophets. They believe in prophets,
Yeah,
but they don't believe in the Messiah.
right. Well, they believe in the
concept of
Messiah.
Messiah. They haven't seen the Messiah.
Yeah, they're still waiting. Right. Yeah, and that's...
They won't deny Isaiah being a prophet, though.
No, not as far as I know.
Other
No.
than parts of it when they say about the Messiah.
Right.
Isaiah
Yeah.
says
Isaiah 53. That's not in our hymnal.
Or 7:14.
That's about
Right.
the country of Israel.
Right. Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, he is really contrasting their earthly and fleshly understanding about, you can tell the signs of the times, but you are the signs in the sky, but you cannot foresee what is going on in the world around you. You have no spiritual eyes to see what's happening around you. And he's going to rebuke them for that continuously, unfortunately. And a wicked and adulterous generation is also from Deuteronomy chapter 20, which that was actually the first time that phrase is used. And I would encourage you to put into your notes, wicked and adulterous, where you see those two words used together. To do a little study on your own regarding where do these, wicked and adulterous appear and in what context. And that is right here in Deuteronomy chapter 20. You'll see one of the first mentions of that. And then, of course, I think we talked about it previously about David stuck those two words together in
Solomon in Proverbs.
Oh, Solomon in Proverbs
6, I think.
6, yeah.
It says evil and adulterous.
Evil and adulterous generation. So yeah, that's a key phraseology there, and it most assuredly, according to Deuteronomy, in the rule of first mention, is talking about you will not hear my instructions.
Well,
You
the-
stiff-necked.
If you remember, the one in Proverbs was the verses right before it. He says that the Torah, the commandments are a lamp, the Torah is a light. And we were talking about the commandments being a very physical to-do list and outward, like the lamp that holds the oil. It's a physical thing. And that the Torah is a light. The Torah is spiritual. The Torah is that flame. And that there's been this problem since the beginning with these guys in Matthew, is that outside, not inside. They have the commandments, but they don't have the Torah.
Right. The light of the Torah, yeah. Grace?
Well, you've given us Deuteronomy 20 without any verses and Proverbs 6 without any verses.
Look at me go. I am failing miserably this evening. I apologize.
I
Angela
don't remember
will.
what I'm supposed to see there.
No, I apologize. Angela, would you check that for me, if you would? The wicked and adulterous generation from Deuteronomy.
20.
I believe it's 20. I could be wrong, but we'll get that for you, Grace.
Then
Thank
the
you.
other thing I wanted to ask,
Yeah.
so are we done with talking about them talking about a sign and all
Not
that?
quite.
Oh, okay. 'Cause
You know, you got something you want to share?
I just wondered if it's more like a question.
Tell us. What do you got?
Where they're saying, where he's saying that, he's saying, didn't you know how to use the heavens to tell the weather and stuff?
Right.
And so obviously they knew that there was intelligence to be seen there,
Sure.
and yet he wanted them to be looking back at the prophets, and they were totally ignoring Jonah.
Mm.
So isn't that one of the things he was telling them they were doing wrong?
Well, that's an excellent question, Grace. And I think, my question back here, we're kind of still talking about this, is what is he rebuking them for? What are they missing that? And it's, are they missing that he's the?
He's already done, and they want another.
Yeah, but he's not saying it. I don't know that we can tie it. Many of you have said, I think, just in the last few minutes, well, he's rebuking them for not recognizing that he's the Messiah. But that doesn't seem to be exactly what he's rebuking them for. He seems to be rebuking them for not understanding the times that they live in. And you could say, well, okay, maybe they're not recognizing that he's the Messiah, and that's certainly the most important thing that's going on in the time that they're living in. But is that all of it? Is he asking them to be able to perceive something else other than just the fact that I am the Messiah and, hey, this is the time when the Messiah is supposed to arrive? Is there anything else that you can think of that he might be inferring that they're missing?
He always says you're blind guides.
Yeah? Grace?
And coming up after that, he's telling them about the leaven of the Pharisees, and then he tells them, no, you saw it wrong. I'm not talking about actual leaven. I'm talking about the
teaching.
Wrongness
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doctrine.
So,
So
I
maybe
don't...
it's not about spiritual, physical, it's about spiritual.
Okay.
We got to remember now, this has taken place. It's only been a week since Yom Teruah, and they're getting ready to go up for Sukkot. Sukkot's just around the corner. It's only a week away.
Right.
So this is the time frame this is happening in.
That's right.
Well, that's
Excellent
Keep that in
insight.
signs.
Excellent
Yes.
insight.
I
Yeah.
would say probably the same word that he uses for the creation day 4 when he creates the
The
sun
Moedim.
and stars for signs.
Yeah.
I guess tagging along with that, in my head, he just kind of added to it with what was in my head was, I feel like, with, as you're saying, with just recognizing that I am the Messiah. It's just, there's so many prophecies, when you think about the prophecy of Daniel, like, with all the numbers that were given and stuff, like, it just...
Yeah, you can...
nothing's clicking in their heart, the light bulbs are clicking at all,
right.
It's like, where are you guys at when it comes to prophecy, too?
Right. And that's a good point, because you can look in Daniel and, it's fairly clear, at least for that part of it, 480 years after the Babylonian captivity and the proclamation to restore the city of Jerusalem, Messiah the Prince is cut off, so it's like you're missing this stuff. And I think that Keith's point about the Moedim being tied in is really key, because it talks about in this very next section that we're coming to, it says 6 days later we have the Mount of the Transfiguration all of a sudden. And I think that that's tied in exactly with what Keith's talking about. So, being able to A, recognize that he is the Messiah and it is the time of the Messiah. B, being able to recognize I am the fulfillment of the prophetic shadow pictures that are represented by the feasts of Yehovah. And C, being able to recognize what is going on in relation to what Derek was saying. And so, I think that there's more to it wrapped up there than we might at first glance notice.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Deuteronomy, what chapter?
I thought it was chapter 20 from my studies. I may be wrong, and I'll find out for you, Grace. Fear not.
The Proverbs is 6:24.
and I'll get you to the Deuteronomy reference. Jerry?
I think if you went back 30 years to when Christ was born and John the Baptist was born, the Magi, the wise men came out because they did all their calculations from Daniel. Like he said, they knew that the Messiah was supposed to be born at this time.
Right.
They circumvented, what's his name, then they got out of town to a back road.
Yes,
I think what
yes.
his name was. But anyways, my story is, he came in and had all the babies under 2 years old killed. However, God sent an angel and said, hey, go down to Alexandria, down to Egypt, someplace down here. So possibly, over the next 30 years, they might have thought, just forgot about the whole thing. If this was a Messiah, he was exterminated. Let's just move on.
Yes.
They would have never known that he wasn't caught in that web of dead children, or they wouldn't have known John the Baptist wasn't caught in that web.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that played a part in it or not. But
That's a good insight. Good insight. A very good insight. I want to ask you about this. You know, when they ask him for a sign back in chapter 12, I think it was. Don't quote me on that, Grace. That he says no sign will be given except for the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days. But you notice that this is the second time now that they have asked him for a sign from heaven, and he references Jonah.
And says all them evil generation.
And says evil and adulterous generation. However, something interesting, this time he says no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. Now, is he just not filling in more details because they should be familiar with the last time they got rebuked, or is something else going on here? Or did Matthew just leave out that detail? Derek?
I heard kind of in relation to what Angie brought up with the letters and with the Hebrew. In the pictographic, you have the Tav being like a T, almost looking like a cross.
Yeah.
And the Vav, almost like a nail. And it's like, not only is he trying to refer them back to the past with Jonah, he's also giving them hints for the future when he's going to be on the cross, and that is going to be your sign.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good insight. Okay, is that what you were talking about? Okay. Well, the first time he mentioned Jonah, he talked about, Jonah being in the belly of the great fish for 3 days, and so he compared that to being in the grave for 3 days. Do you think there's more to it than just this comparison between being in the fish for 3 days and being in the ground for 3 days? Jerry?
possibility, well, when Jonah came out, there was a lot of people saved afterwards. When Christ came out of the ground, there was 3,000 people saved after their Pentecost from that first message. Maybe those correlate together.
Yeah. And I think if you just examine the life and ministry of Jonah personally and just look at his story overall, you can see some interesting parallels. Because here is a prophet, Jonah, who is called of God to go where? Nineveh. Where's Nineveh?
Syria?
That's Babylon. That's Babylon. That's basically ancient Babylon. And so he's saying, go to this Gentile city, which is wicked, and let them know that I'm going to destroy them completely unless they repent. Now, he doesn't want to go, so he tries to go away to Spain.
Was he given 40 days to repent? Was it 40?
40 days to repent.
Yeah.
Okay. Then, of course, we have the episode with the fish. They throw him overboard. He gets swallowed and vomited onto the beach.
Which parallels the storm when Yeshua's in the boat sleeping.
In an interesting way. Yeah.
The boat is flesh, right?
Yeah. The boat is like your flesh that's floating on the waters. We've talked about that kind of imagery. So if you think about Jonah going to the city of Nineveh, and what happens when he preaches the gospel to them?
They get saved.
They repent.
They do, yeah.
And their city is spared. And he knew that they would.
That's why he didn't want to go.
That's why he didn't want to go. So what's interesting is
He knew God would change his mind.
he didn't want to go because he knew that God would be merciful to the Gentiles, and he didn't want to be merciful to the Gentiles.
Yeah,
I felt like justice wasn't being done.
He felt that was unjust to let these people off the hook.
murder them all.
Deathbed confession kind of stuff. Okay, and so now he goes and he preaches to them, and they repent. I'm not going to say they get saved or whatever, but they certainly are rescued in the sense of salvation from impending disaster. And then what does he do once that happens? He goes and skulks under a bush and complains and gets all bent out of shape. How does that relate to these Perushim and the Zedachim?
The man for no signs.
Is that the curtain?
These guys, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, have the same attitude as Jonah. Because they are saying, wait a minute, because he is already on two occasions now, no, one occasion with the Gentile woman. I think that we are getting a bit of foreshadowing about what's happening here, about how his whole ministry is shifted. We talked about when he was when John the Baptist was beheaded. It says that he no longer walked openly and kind of went away from there, and that his ministry seems to have shifted, and he begins his condemnation, like Angela talked about a month ago, with him putting them on trial and saying, "Stamp, wicked and adulterous generation."
Yep.
And so now he's turning, and his message is turning and changing, and he's starting to reveal more truth to his disciples, but shut himself off a little bit more to the outsiders. And so I think you can see a little bit more comparisons with Jonah than just belly of a fish, 3 days in the grave. I think it's beyond that. I think it's growing to talk about the inclusion of Gentiles and Gentile repentance and Gentiles turning. Yeah. It's part of exactly what we talked about last week. So,
And he was mad because, too, Jonah was mad because he wanted people to believe him of what God said. And when God turned it around because they repented, he was mad because they wouldn't see him as telling the truth. But actually he told the truth, but because they repented, God turned it around. But that's basically why he was mad, too.
yeah.
Well, they'll think that I lied or something.
Sure,
I thought that was
sure.
funny when I read it.
Yeah, it is an interesting story. It's certainly.
Jonah prophesied for 3 days.
Oh, yeah, through the streets.
3 days.
Okay, yeah.
And then
And
in
nights.
Navarre, in 40 days they repented.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus preached for 3 years. And he was back after 40 days.
Unless
No
you're a
repentance.
Rudite.
And they were given another 40 years. And they were given
Sorry,
another
that was a
40
joke for
years.
Jerry.
40 years before the temple was finally destroyed. So I think because if you will read the 12 chapter 12, he says, "You evil judge, you will not believe, and greater than Jonah is here." But unlike Jonah, these guys with just his preaching of 3 days, they repented, and they were Gentiles. You are the son, the children of God. I am greater than Jonah. I preached for you for 3 years. You will repent.
Doesn't he
You
say
will be
something about the
condemned.
people
That's why he
of Nineveh
said.
will condemn you?
The people of Nineveh will rise up in the judgment and condemn you.
These other
Yeah.
Bathsheba or whatever.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's what he was saying too, that you do not know what's going on with you. You cannot
Right.
understand. That's why they have so much demonic possession, they have so much illness. God is supposed, that's the promise of God. If they obey his commandment, they're supposed to be free from illness, free from demons.
Yeah,
free from
I
the
just was.
subjection of other nations, and
Yeah.
all these things are happening, and
Yeah.
they still didn't know that they were really these things are happening to them because they were breaking God's law, and they were thinking the Messiah will come, he will save us, he will, fight with the Romans, and we'll be free. And they're not thinking that spiritually they were just corrupt, bankrupt.
How history
That's what they
repeats
say.
itself.
What's that, Grace?
How history repeats itself.
Isn't that fabulous? It's true. Annie?
Yeah, I still don't, and what I don't understand, like we saw a parallel maybe of Jonah and that generation, but in our reality, Yeshua compares himself a little bit with Jonah, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I don't
Yeah.
get. It's really interesting. Like I would never think that Jonah was a Messiah figure.
Right. Yeah.
If the same thing happens if you do that with Samson.
Samson, yeah, that's true.
There are so many parallels between Messiah and Samson.
Yeah.
You would say Samson? Really?
Yeah, he's not an excellent.
Yeah.
It's
So yeah.
Yeah.
How
That's
God
really-
can use him.
Yeah.
That one
Well-
was really disobedient.
why he
Yeah.
made us.
Yeah, Samson is not a good role model, but you know what? There are a lot of messianic parallels. Even the rabbis will talk about messianic, indications in Samson. And
He was in Hebrew, in the book of Hebrews. He was among the faith.
yeah, that's
men of
true.
faith.
That's true.
Jesus is from the line of some pretty
Yeah,
bad women.
that is true. Loose women. That's right.
But he did remain good.
I want to ask one more question, and then we'll talk a little bit about this chiastic structure in this little section here. Now, when Yeshua informed his taught ones to watch out for the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, why was he rebuking them for their lack of understanding? He says, "You have no faith." How is that? I mean, he says, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Obviously, he's talking about their teaching, right? They figured that out later. But then they start to argue amongst themselves about the fact that they brought no bread, and he says, you have no faith. Does anybody know how to make sense out of that passage?
Well, I'm just thinking he's hearing them bickering about, oh my gosh, we should have brought bread. Did you bring the bread? I didn't bring it. He's like, who did? I'll make bread if we need bread. What are you guys bickering? We can call down bread anytime.
Right.
But
Yeah,
you
I
know.
think that's a good. That is also my understanding, Keith, is that is kind of what's going on here. And some people might read this and go, wait a minute, what is he talking about? Why, they have no faith? What does it mean to have faith and you didn't understand what I was saying? I don't think that's what's happening. I think Keith is right.
Well, and then how many? They've already had 2 examples of
Right.
him multiplying the bread,
Right.
and here they are worrying about bringing bread,
Right.
like they worried
I
last
think-
time where the bread was going to come from.
And I think it goes a little bit further, Keith, also, when he says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They're looking at themselves going, oh, crap, we don't have any bread. We forgot to bring food. So not only are they missing the point, they're completely sidetracked. He's talking about something spiritual again, and they're looking at the flesh thinking, oh, what are we going to eat? We forgot to bring food. And he's like, wait, first of all, you have no faith. I'm able to take care of the lack of food. Don't worry about that. But you do not understand what I was talking about. Beware of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So that's, he has to remind them again that he is their provider and then inform them what he really is talking about. Beware your corrupt leadership, which I think is a key point. Now, I want you to, has anyone, while we've been talking or as we were reading this, notice anything about perhaps the chiastic structure of this little section here and how that might form a chiasm?
It's pretty clear. Well, some of it.
Yeah, tell me what you see,
I
John.
think the first one is, let's see, where was it?
Verse 5?
Verse 5.
Sorry, I didn't take it and break it out into a structure for you. I apologize.
It says first in 6, take heed and be aware.
Right.
So I think then also in, where was it? 11b.
Yeah.
To be aware of the leaven.
Mhm.
So it's exactly symmetrical.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then further we have in, I thought it was 9. Do you not understand?
Mm-hmm.
And then 11 we have also, how is it that you do not understand?
Right. Right.
Let's see, then we have the 5,000 in 9b.
Mm-hmm.
Or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000.
Okay.
And that comes again, of course, back in 10. But then the only thing is then we still need something in the middle, right? The punchline.
I think you've done a pretty good job, and I think you've got things
I must miss something.
slightly rearranged. And
sure.
Angela will help me with this. But if you look at this first, we've got the mention of bread.
Well,
Last, we have the mention of bread.
No. Okay, I don't know.
There's several ways that you can break this
It
down.
was beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And then you've got this discussion about why are you? What's this thing about? Why are you worried about not bringing bread? And then if you go up from the last verse, how could you understand I was not speaking about bread? And in the middle of all that, you've got, do you remember the loaves for the 5,000 and the baskets you took up and the loaves for the 4,000 in the basket? And he mentions those numbers again. And remember, last week we talked about the possibility of that 5, or a pretty wide held theory. The first feeding was to the Jews and the second feeding was to Gentiles, which goes right back to what we were just saying about the transition of the program. And this whole thing about bread being the Torah, his words, and leaven being the Pharisees' alterations to that.
Right. So I think you have at the center of the chiasm remembering the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and the 7 loaves for the 4,000, and how we talked about that being a transition, that might be representing the Hebrew people in the first feeding and moving to the Gentile people in the second, because he crossed the sea and went to the Decapolis area in the second feeding. Go ahead.
So the middle of the chiasm is
The feedings.
Why are you discussing among yourselves that you don't have any bread? You have so little faith. That would be the middle. No, because the feedings look like they would be on the.
Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees.
That would be A.
Right.
This is your low A, is against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. That's your low A.
Mm-hmm.
And then your B, they discuss, it's because we brought no bread. He said, okay, why are we arguing about having no bread? So you have bread issue. They come up from here and you have bread issue. Sadducees, how could you understand I was not speaking to you about bread?
Right.
And then in between your breads, you have
The feedings.
Do you still not understand? Remember the feeding of the loaves of 5,000 baskets?
that's the center.
7 loaves for the, and how many baskets?
Yeah, so the center of the chiasm is the feedings.
And it could be, well, yeah.
The thing about the faith, you have a little.
Or do you not understand?
Well, and you know what? You could include. Do you still not understand in regarding to the feedings? Okay, and I think that if you look at that a little bit deeper and how we talked about the feedings last time, that the program is changing and that we're now kind of switching our attention to the tight-knit circle, and then we're going to go from there and radiate out into all the world. And I think maybe the takeaway, and this is just my own insight into this section, is that frankly, if you look at, for example, in Exodus chapter 18, 19 area, where he talks about, I am bringing you out to serve me, and you will be a light to the nations, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. So, what was the calling of the Hebrew people, the Israelites, when he brought them out of Egypt? What is it they were supposed to do and be?
The light of the world.
The light of the world, a kingdom of priests.
The
The
world.
light of the world. Okay, so now how did that work out?
Not too good.
That did not work out at all. Okay, not only did they corrupt themselves, but they really shut themselves off. It's almost like, I want to use the expression, they hid their light under a bushel. You know what I'm saying? They were not a light in the world, and letting this glory of God radiate into the other nations to be an example for them, because God says, these people around you are going to say, what an awesome and amazing and wise people these are, who with great statutes and a God that is close to them whenever they call on him. That did not work out. They really shut themselves off and began to consider the Gentiles unclean and unworthy of even talking to. You know what I'm saying? And so what the nation, just like Paul talks about in Romans, we're going to be set aside for a time, darkness applied. You will not be a light to the world. I will use others to be a light to the world. Now, we understand that concept, that he turned to the Gentiles and began to graft them in to his people. Now, how has that worked out about the Gentiles being a light to the nations?
Not very good.
It's I would say it's been a little bit, maybe a little bit better. I don't know that you could.
It reached me.
Yeah, it reached me, and it reached a lot of us. You know what? I mean, if you want I know that you don't want to, but I will anyway. Look at the world's 7 billion population and how many are identified as believers in the book. Now, we'll exclude the...
Outreach than there was for the...
Yes, and I think that is a good point. Outreach. That the Christian mission outreach to the world has been...
We're supposed to make the Jews jealous, though, and that's not working out at all.
No, that hasn't worked out at all until recently. When we have begun to adopt Torah, that's definitely making them jealous. But of course, when our Messiah bears no relation to the Messiah of the Bible, why would they be jealous of that? That doesn't make any sense at all. Your Messiah is very clearly not Jewish. He's very clearly not the Messiah that's talked about in the Bible.
He did away with the Torah.
Yeah, he does away with the Torah, and he says you can eat whatever you want. And that's not the Messiah of the Bible. And so, yeah, that's very easy for them to reject the Christian Messiah as we have.
Well, they've changed the whole Constitution. Gentiles aren't supposed to be grafted into the Jews. The Jews are supposed to graft into the believers.
That's what they
Yeah,
say.
everything's gotten flipped on its head. But I would say in relation to being a light in the world and, proclaiming the message of God and being a light, maybe the church, if you want to term it that way, has done a little bit of a better job. Not awesome.
But
Not
the
awesome.
tares have grown so wild.
The tares have grown wild. Yes, this wild field of Gentiles has tares everywhere, and there's no question about that.
And the traditions
But
of men.
yeah, the traditions of men have always crept into the assembly of Elohim, and they still are today. There's nothing new. And Messiah prophesied about that in the parables that we just read a couple of weeks ago, talking about the kingdom parables. He had, I think we saw, all kinds of problem in that kingdom with monstrous mustard trees and birds roosting in its branches and yeast being spread everywhere and tares coming up with the wheat. Yeah, this kingdom is infiltrated by the enemy, and they're doing a fabulous job of impersonating wheat. So that is what I would suggest is maybe the center of that chiasm. And if you want to extrapolate from that and talk a little bit about what is this feeding? And I think it talks about the transformation of the kingdom of God being expanded into a much larger area, and that they will perhaps do a better job spreading that light. It's not been awesome, but maybe a little bit better.
Well, they talk about him, that he's the light.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. So now that we've beaten those first 12 verses to death, let us look at the next set of almost 12 verses. Matthew 16:13 through 28. Now in Matthew 16:13 through 28, we have this. When Yeshua came to the area of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they answered, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Shimon Kepha answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim." And Yeshua answered him, "You are blessed, Shimon ben Yonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Petros, and on this rock I will build my congregation, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven." Then he instructed his disciples not to tell anyone that he was Messiah. From that time on, Yeshua began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the experts in the Torah, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. So Kepha took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Elohim forbid, Adonai, this must not happen to you." But he turned and said to Kepha, "Get behind me, Hasatan. You are a stumbling block to me, because you are not setting your mind on Elohim's interests, but on man's." Then Yeshua said to his disciples, "If anyone wants to become my follower, he must deny himself, take up his execution stake, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what does it benefit a person if he gains the whole world but forfeits his life? Or what can a person give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man will come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you the truth, there are some standing here who will not experience death before they see the Son of Man appearing in his kingdom. Fascinating stuff. That's sweet.
Especially that last.
Yeah, that's a good one. Now, I got a question for you, and I know that, and I don't know if it's anything, sometimes I'm throwing out trial balloons and you guys pop them for me, and that's okay. Why is Yeshua talking about himself in the third person and then switch to the first person? Is that traditional understanding? Does that totally work for you, or do you have any questions about whether that might be talking about something else?
It's not only Jesus who says that, does that. A lot of characters in the Bible does that. Even the angels do that.
What?
Speak with the third person about themselves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I don't.
So
know,
you don't
maybe
have a problem with that?
Issue. Yeah.
Okay. So you know what's curious to me is when I hear Son of Man, I'm thinking about Daniel chapter 7, right?
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, just throwing this out there, maybe he's asking the disciples, what do people think the Son of Man is? He's not referring to himself at all.
In the book of
Throw that out there. What do you think?
book of Enoch, over 20 times it's referred to as the Messiah.
Okay.
So that's what I think of him as.
Okay. So you think that he is referring to himself?
Right.
Okay. Or is he maybe testing their understanding about who is this Son of Man?
He could be doing both.
Okay.
So in the King James here, it's not the third person. This whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am. So that I is missing here, right?
Yes, it is. Isn't that interesting? Of course, that happens a lot. But if you look at that in Greek, and I'm not going to, fight that battle on the Greek hillside. But if you look at maybe the Hebrew Matthew, what do you got, Angelina?
It looks like a two-parter. I didn't see it that way. It says, what do the sons of men say about me? First question. Second question, who is the Son of Man? Then when they answer him, it seems like they're answering first, who is the Son of Man? Because they say, some say he, Son of Man, is Yochanan the Immerser.
So you notice
some
how
say
they...
he is Elijah. Some say he is Jeremiah. Then he asks them again, but as for you, what do you say about me? Who do you say I am? And then Peter says that.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And I think the reason that I considered that is because we were just talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees saying, you guys are blind to the signs of the times. And this takes me right back to Daniel with the signs of the times and knowing what's supposed to be happening in this time of the world. And Daniel's right where we get that Son of Man, this prophesied Son of Man. So I'm wondering if because it's clear to me when he starts to tell them, I'm going to have to go and die, that Simon Peter, that does not comport with his theology. That'd be like telling us a few years ago, there is no pre-tribulation rapture. He's like, whoa, what are you talking about? This is not how things work. Okay, so that's why I considered that maybe he was saying, what is your concept of the Son of Man? Who is this Son of Man that Daniel's talking about? And they're like, oh, well, some people say it's Elijah because Elijah never died and he comes back, or something like that. Or maybe it's one of the prophets reincarnated or something like that. And then I think that he is cluing them in a little bit by suddenly turning that conversation on its head a little bit and saying, who do you say that I am? By kind of keying them in. Do you see the connection here, guys? I am the Son of Man. They're still not seeing it exactly. Yeah, he just said, and he is just about to say, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. And Yeshua said, flesh and blood did not reveal that to you. You just had a revelation from the Father. Suddenly, he's a prophet. He apparently seems to have received direct revelation from God. This is my son. And it happens again right at the very beginning of chapter 17 at the Mount of Transfiguration. They're slapped around again and said, pay attention to him, because Moses and Elijah appeared right there on the mountain. It's like, you guys, no, build sukkahs for these guys. This is my son. So I think the disciples are still stumbling around a little bit, trying to figure out what exactly, we're a little confused. You're obviously something special, but they're not quite understanding even yet. Go ahead, sorry. Either one of you.
Well, I'm going back to Angela's concept too, because these are young men, right?
This is
That's
true.
right.
I still imagine how well are they versed in the Torah, considering we walk around with books and we have it right at our fingertips. They only heard what they heard in the synagogue every Shabbat, and they're fishermen, they're always working, they're so preoccupied with doing other things, So then that was a good question that he's asking them, just trying to find out where they're at in their understanding.
Yeah.
Right, just like you alluded to.
And I'm not going to be hard and fast on this, but it just, the way that this was worded struck me as a little bit odd, and it seemed to tie back into the previous section. And I just wondered if perhaps he was testing their eschatological knowledge of what do you understand about prophecy and who this Son of Man is? And then he kind of turns it on its ear and says, well, who do you say that I am? Kind of testing them a little bit. Anik?
What also irritates me here, what I don't understand is, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. So did they think that they would reincarnate or
Yes,
what? I know with Elijah they were waiting for Elijah as the forerunner of the Messiah, kind of in the same spirit of Elijah. So
Right.
they didn't think that Elijah would be born again or whatever, reincarnate. But with Jeremiah or the other prophets, that irritates
That's a
me.
little weird. Yes, we know. I can understand, if Enoch or Elijah were to show up, they never died. They were taken away to heaven and then they could come back, and that makes more sense with my brain. But to say, oh, it's Jeremiah or one of the prophets, resurrected or reincarnated or something like that, yeah, that's a little bit weird. What were you saying, Angelina?
Yeah, well, I heard that in Jewish, that you'll find that idea of reincarnation in there. It's never addressed or corrected or anything by Yeshua, but I think that in their culture, that might have been kind of a
I
for
do.
Elijah during the Passover.
Well, I think here's the thing. If you were
You look into
to,
that. I just heard that once.
a lot of modern.
I'm not saying I think that. I'm just
Yeah,
saying
Yeah, no, I
they
understand.
might have thought that.
Yeah.
That's right, because they do have the seed of Elijah and Passover. They expect him to appear.
Now, you can find some references to reincarnation in
And
more
ghosts.
modern Hebrew stuff, but I have not seen it in the ancient Hebrew writings. Because what you got to understand, which is very interesting, do you know what the number one religion is in Israel?
Judaism.
No, not even close.
What? I didn't hear what she said.
Only less than 10% of the population are believers in God.
Whirling dervishes?
Whirling dervishes.
Yeah.
Probably is.
No, less than 10% of the population in Israel today are actually believers in God. A larger preponderance of them are Eastern, they believe in Eastern mysticism. There's a lot of Buddhism and Taoism and Shintoism. The Eastern religions are very, very popular in Israel.
And among the Hebrews or among the people who went there? The Hebrews themselves?
I'm just saying the population of the modern state of Israel. Yeah, what's that? Oh, so yeah, there is a lot of that type of thinking in modern Kabbalah type stuff. But if you're looking in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, you're not going to see a lot of references to reincarnation. But Angela, maybe, I don't know what Angela
You could look into it.
Yeah, you can look into that. But, that does trouble me as well as to some extent. It's like, wait a minute, what are we looking at here? Elijah,
I mean, Elijah is a different story. I
Yeah.
understand Elijah. But
Yeah,
I
that
don't
makes more
understand
sense.
Jeremiah.
Well,
Right,
Herod,
yeah.
Herod said,
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Baptist
John the
one.
Baptist raised from the dead. Yes.
It's almost like this idea, not that you're die and that you're born into another person, but that almost you channel someone who has died.
Well,
Right.
hold on now, because I don't think channeling or reincarnation is necessary here. I know you're using the term loosely. I know. What I'm going to say is that he says in a little bit, I tell you that he was Elijah, talking about John the Baptist, right? So
Yes, they're taking it literally.
no, I know.
It might just be more of a
No, it's in the
Elijah.
spirit of Elijah,
Yes.
okay?
Yeah.
Doing the same function
Yeah.
as Elijah. That's a little bit more my understanding of it. Go ahead, Derek.
I was going to bring that up, and with that being brought up, I was just wondering, I guess, I don't know, I guess exclusively they were just simply providing answers that other people said.
That would be my assumption, yeah. They're just saying, what is popular out there? What are the popular
Because
theories?
they just had that conversation with him before, and he clarified that John the Baptist was Elijah, if you can receive it.
Okay, excellent, Jerry?
It seems like to me, if they had admitted that he was God, the Messiah, they'd have been in big trouble. But if they could have said, well, it's not God, it's this guy or this guy or this guy, it's not quite so bad. Just like evolution versus creation.
Okay.
If this is a minor guy, yeah, we can just go on the way we've been living. But if it's really God,
Yeah,
maybe we better change our ways.
good point. Good
I
point.
mean, I don't know. It's just
Yeah,
thought.
no, that's a good insight.
One question about the translation. Probably mine is wrong. Because,
No, that-
yours is pretty literal.
Generally,
Yeah, and mine says in 13, and I don't know the rest of us. Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?
That's King James.
yeah, that's what we were talking about a second ago regarding.
And I hear in Greek, I have an echo. It clearly says that also. So, of course, anthropos, logos, echo.
Ego.
So it's really it's saying who says that I am. But I don't know if it's a made up word in my version. It's new King James.
Yeah, I do have that in mind, saying, who me do say men to be the Son of Man. That's the literal translation from Greek to English.
I am,
Yeah, and it does say ego in that.
So he did call himself the Son of Man right there.
Yes, he does seem to be identifying himself as the Son of Man. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what did the Son of Man mean?
That's what we were talking about, because that's first mentioned in the book of Daniel as being, the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven and destroying the enemies. It's first mentioned in the book of Daniel, chapter 7.
But he was talking already, Son of Man, the Son of Man.
Yeah, and I think that he was doing that right from the beginning, talking about the Son of Man, because I think he's trying to stir up their memories regarding what the prophet Daniel had said and identify himself with that, and rightly so, because that's definitely a messianic passage from Daniel chapter 7. So I think that's definitely what he's doing. Now, strange little rabbit trail we took there, but it was kind of cool. Now compare Matthew 16, verse 16, where Shimon Kepha says, "You are Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim," and Yeshua answered him, "Blessed are you." And then John chapter 11, verse 49. I want us to take a look at something here for just a second. John 11:49 says this. Then one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said, "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is more to your advantage to have one man die for the people than for the whole nation to perish." Now he did not say this on his own initiative, but because he was high priest that year, he prophesied that Yeshua was going to die for the Yehudim. You notice what's the comparison here? Did you see the parallel? You just went right over your head. Okay.
He will die.
Okay, so yes, in John chapter 11 we have the high priest Caiaphas saying, because they're talking about killing this guy Jesus, who's causing all this trouble, And they're like, yeah, but everybody's going to freak out and we need to kill him. And he's like, look, man, you guys don't understand. It is more beneficial for the safety of the nation that this one man should die than for us all to get into trouble with the Romans and we all die. But he was not speaking on his own initiative because being high priest that year, he prophesied that Yeshua was going to die for the people. You notice he just prophesied unwittingly.
Yes, like
Like Balaam. Balaam, just like Simon Peter just did. Suddenly the spirit of prophecy, the Spirit of God came upon him and he spouted out, "You're the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim." It's like he didn't even realize what he was saying. And Messiah says, "Blessed are you, Simon, the son of Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." And we've talked about this before, but I think this gives us a little bit of insight into prophecy. And that remember that, yes, some prophets knew they were prophets because they were receiving direct messages from Elohim to something to translate. So many of them didn't understand. But sometimes the Spirit of God comes upon a person and they speak truth and they don't even know it.
Right, they don't even understand it.
Yeah. So we need to get away from this idea of a prophet as being someone who tells the future and pronounces doom and gloom and says this is what's going to happen and this is what you're going to do. And I remember being, when I was younger, going to a four-square Pentecostal type of church. We had prophets that came to visit the congregation and they'd tell you about your future. That's pure witchcraft. It's like, let me tell you what's going to happen to you in the future. And there's no real spiritual edification. There's no real spiritual message there at all. It's just personal prophecy. I don't know if you guys have ever been exposed to that, but that is divination. That's really, really close to the occult, if not the occult, period. And you're going to want to remember that when the Spirit of Elohim comes upon a person, they speak the words of Elohim. This is a prophet. And foretelling the future can be a part of it or cannot be a part of it. Just remember that. I just wanted to point that out. I don't know why I harp on that. I apologize. On what rock is the congregation built? Yeah, most of your Bibles probably say the church. You you will remember, I know, that the word church is not in your Bible. Ecclesia, yes.
And the Hebrew equivalent of that is
Kahila, the congregation. So the church first appeared in the wilderness, and even before that. So the church was not invented in Acts chapter 15, just so you know.
No,
Now,
again, church age.
yeah, go Grace. So, interesting here, we've got, blessed are you because my Father revealed this to you, and you are Peter, and on this rock. What rock?
Christ.
Jesus, in his confession, that Jesus is the Messiah.
Do you know that this is where the popes get the power to make law?
Yeah.
They got the big rock. They got the little rock.
Well, they think that he was saying, you are Peter, and Peter is the rock, and that Peter has the authority. Now, notice we talk about binding and loosing here in just a second. And of course, the Pope traces his authority directly to Peter, the first Roman Pope, according to them. And so the Pope thinks he has power in the world because of this statement about Yeshua. Now, I think the Pope probably understands something that a lot of us don't. If you are not kind of decently versed in Hebrew literature of the Mishnah and the Talmud, talking about binding and loosing, you may have no idea what that is. And in fact, I know that in those in some of those charismatic Pentecostal type of situations, what is binding and loosing at, June? Do you remember what that is?
Demons.
Demons. Binding and loosing demons. That is.
Then they jump on you and start beating you up.
Exactly. So, if you look in the first century literature of the Talmud and the Mishnah, you will see that binding and loosing has nothing to do with demons. Do you know what it has to do with?
Authority.
Authority. Yes. If you bind something, you forbid it.
No wonder we got.
If you loose something, you permit it. It's about allowing and disallowing. And so, you can take a look. In fact, a perfect example of this is the congregation meeting in the book of Acts, chapter 15, to discuss, we've got ourselves a theological problem here. And we need to make a decision. And the Messiah's assembly was imbued with authority. And so James was perfectly within his rights as the chief elder of the council, the ruling council in Jerusalem of the followers of the Messiah, to have authority. And I know that we've discussed authority before within the body of Messiah, and that we're all a bunch of rebels and we don't like authority, especially here in America. But this is what he's talking about. And James makes a ruling in Acts chapter 15 based upon this authority that has been given to the disciples to bind and loose. And so what was the decision in Acts chapter 15? What was the problem?
Circumcision.
Circumcision.
You got to do works to get saved.
Conversion to Judaism.
Yeah.
Yes. You must convert to Judaism if you're a Gentile. You must convert to Judaism or you cannot be saved. That starts a huge fight. And you know what? That fight carries all the way through the book of Acts. It carries all the way into Paul's writings in Galatians, in Corinthians, in Ephesians. That is a big, big problem. We can see Yeshua addressing it, and it's still a big problem today. Who are the people of God? It's not the Jews, right? It's the Christians. And of course, the Jews would say, you Christians have no idea what you're talking about. We are still fighting about that issue that was addressed in Acts chapter 15 today. And what we need to realize is that authority was given to the disciples for binding and loosing and making decisions, and that therefore it would behoove us to study very carefully about the decision that they made in chapter 15 of Acts. And so, what is the rock? I'm going to back up just a little bit. What is the rock upon which he is going to establish his Kehillah? Great.
Isn't it himself? You are the Christ Son.
That is the rock.
He's the foundation, the word.
He is the Messiah. The fact that Peter spoke those no truer words, he is the Messiah. It is upon that rock that this whole thing is going to be built. Angela.
I was going to go back further.
Go back a little further. Throw in some more cool stuff. What do you
There's a
got?
couple things. One is in Isaiah, he says, look to the rock from which you were hewn, to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham, your father, and Sarah, who gave birth to you.
Yeah.
In pain. But what I noticed here is he says you get to forbid and allow here on earth and in heaven. And in a couple sentences later, when Peter says that thing
That will
about,
never happen to you.
right, he goes.
He suddenly
He's
gets
trying
slapped.
he actually says, Elohim forbid, you are not, or this must not happen to you.
Yeah,
so
he's-
Peter tries out his little, I'm going to forbid this on earth, and he gets smacked hard for it. So I don't, maybe
Yeah.
he wasn't quite ready to take that forbidding and allowing.
Yeah, that often happens when you get a little bit of power. It goes to your head. You misuse it. But yeah, that's an excellent insight. And you know, some people have also brought up the fact that they are in the area of Caesarea Philippi where the actual gates of Hades are located. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but there is a pit built into a cliff that is a huge hole in the ground out of which comes some noxious fumes which will get you stoned off of your gourd. And that the priests,
The prophecy
the priests would actually get high and prophesy and have a weird experience there at the gates of Hades.
That was Pan worship. Pan was the god of the goats? The shepherds?
Yes.
Oh,
God
yeah.
of the shepherds. And that we get our word panic from Pan. And they would do things to excite Pan so that they would have a lot more little baby goats. I mean, what they did there to excite Pan was just
Vile and
HBO
despicable.
blushed. But yeah, if you type it in, Gates of Hades, and images on Google, you'll get pictures of that. Huge.
Yeah.
And Michael Root did a really good thing on it too.
Yes, he did. Very interesting stuff.
And also the guy who sent a video, we gave a video to us.
Ray Vanderlyn.
Yeah, Yeah.
Ray Vanderlaan
Yeah.
also did a very interesting study about the gates of Hades in the area of Caesarea Philippi. Very interesting stuff. And if you guys haven't seen Ray Vanderlaan, he's not a Hebrew roots, Messianic kind of guy, but he travels Israel extensively and does some very, very interesting teachings. And so,
Vanderland?
yeah, he's a Dutch fellow like
He
our
has
Big
videos
John
you can
here.
borrow. I'll get him out after and I'll put him on the counter or something.
Yeah, Ray Vanderlaan. Vander, capital Laan. Vanderlaan. Vanderlaan. Anyway, very, very interesting teacher with a lot of cool stuff. And next, we want to talk about how is it that he is having to now explain to his disciples that he must die and be crucified and raised from the dead? How is it that they do not understand that?
Well, some other ideas about
Yeah, they have their own ideas about him coming in on the white horse and destroying the enemies and subjugating them, and all of a sudden.
Gut punch. I don't think any of us
Yeah.
was there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a gut punch, to think, wait a minute, you're not going to destroy the Romans and establish the kingdom, What are you talking about? Die? We're just getting started. So, they were still stumbling over this idea of a dual role Messiah, not two Messiahs, but one Messiah that does multiple roles. They were definitely stumbling over that, for sure.
They also witnessed that Jesus was almost like being threatened to death. Several times they wanted to grab him, kill him, or
Yeah, right.
throw him away.
But they've also seen him escape those situations, seemingly miraculously, perhaps.
They were even saying that last scene, Jesus going to the temple on Passover, that we will die with you.
Yeah.
So they were, I don't know, they were aware of
I
it.
think that it's after this that they start having those conversations about we will die with you and we'll give our lives up, because I think that right here is where it really starts to sink in a little bit.
That changed their mind.
Wait a minute, you're not going to establish the kingdom right now. We still got a lot of work ahead of us, and you're actually going to die. That was just blew their minds, obviously.
They're in an age where invincibility is. That's just
Yeah, that's
feel
true
that
too.
Stuff, you don't think about that.
Yeah, that is true too. Here's something. Talking about rebuking Peter. About whose interests are we advancing? Our own or God's, and denying ourselves. Reflecting on the ownership. And I want to just touch on that for just a moment. Denying yourself and picking up your cross has been a fabulous Christian euphemism for a long, long time. But I want to bring out a couple of things that you might want to think about. One is, think about this. When the Israelites were in Egypt, serving as slaves of Pharaoh, they were stolen property, right? Whose servants were they? Whose
God's
servants
servants.
were they really?
God.
They were God's servants, and he was dealing in stolen property. He had appropriated something that did not belong to him. He says, let my people go that they may serve me. So he is appropriating what does not belong to him. Okay, and so here's the thing. God has the Passover, and he sets them free. And how long did that freedom last? A very short time.
About a month.
Yeah, maybe about a month. So your freedom lasts for a very short time there in that story. Because what does he say? You are my servants, and you're now going to serve me. Now, we all know, and I talk about my kids I've talked to my kids about politics sometimes, and there's some, they know that, a dictatorship is probably the best form of government you can have, as long as the dictator is Jesus.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good
As long as the
qualifier.
dictator is a godly
Very
person
good qualifier.
who knows what to do and is following the Bible, you're probably in okay shape. And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. A dictatorship that's God's way of doing things. I am the dictator and you will listen to me. So, you know what? When you become God's servants, you're not free. He purchased you, right? Through the Exodus, the redemption of the firstborn. So they were only free for a very short period of time, and then they were servants. And the same thing happens with the law of the bond servant, where you worship, you work for your master for 6 years, and in the 7th year he's going to set you free, and he's like, here's your certificate to go free. And they're like, huzzah! But I don't know about that. It's kind of this. People who have served in the military often feel this way about, I have had my life regulated, and people tell me when to eat, sleep, go to the bathroom, when to jump, how high to jump, and my life is ordered and perfectly ordered. All my ducks are in a row, and I got to worry about nothing except to keep my ears open for somebody telling me what to do. There's a certain freedom in that, in not having to think for yourself and just do what the master, the drill sergeant, gunny, whoever is talking to you, what they say. As long as they've got a rank that's higher than yours, you're listening and you're following directions, and that's it. And the law of the bondservant has the same thing. You are working for the master. He sets you free at the end of 6 years, but then you say, I don't really want to be free. And then he pierces your ear with that awl, and there leaves a little spot of blood on the door. It's kind of like the Passover. And you're now his servant forever. But there's more to it than that. You are his family member. He is required to provide for you like family. And you're required to serve him just like Peter or Paul says, serve the Lord as though you're serving, serve each other like you're serving God.
Yeah.
And I think that is exactly what Messiah Yeshua is talking about. Whoever who wants to follow me, I'm about to do another redemption. I'm about to purchase you for my own. Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it for life eternal. Saying, you know what, I'm going to set you free, but if you really want to be free indeed, you'll become my servants. And so I think that's a lot of our issue, especially in the United States, where we have such a streak of freedom. It can border into the rebellious quite a bit, is we do not recognize authority very well. This whole country was founded on rebellion. And so we are fiercely rebellious people and stiff-necked people who don't like authority as it is. And you know what? We have a hard time with looking at the Bible and it telling us, don't do this and don't do that. Well, in the back of our minds, I think we're saying, who's going to tell me what to do?
When you really love God, you want
Yes.
to please him.
When you love your master,
And you want to surrender your own will, like I want to do this, but I
Yeah.
do because you told me to.
that's right. That's
the
right.
difference.
Exactly right. Grace?
You
Oh,
look at the whole picture of, like back in the Torah and when God made the covenants with Abraham and stuff,
mm-hmm.
and what he has promised as the supreme being who does not break his word. And you look at what he's having us do for our share, and then you see in the New Testament where it says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Right.
It really,
Right.
it's a no-brainer. It really puts things into perspective.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever looked at it as closely
That's-
like that as right now.
Yeah. Excellent insight.
And besides, there's only really two masters in the entire universe.
Yeah.
So if you
You're
choose
serving one or the other.
Yeah.
That's right. You got to
I think
serve
it's a
somebody.
no-brainer to be on this side.
Yeah.
Larry?
Well, I was going to say what you were saying. It's a weird parallel, but the people that are incarcerated and they get released,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them don't want to be. They want to go back. Just kind of the comfort, like what you were saying.
Of a structure.
The structure. They don't have to think or do anything by themselves. Everything's provided. The problem is they can't just walk up to a police officer and say, "Take me back to prison." They have to commit a crime.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of the crimes are committed just because people want to get back in, but it
Yeah.
reminded me of what you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I have heard
The
that.
total wrong idea of it, but
No, but Ed, you're absolutely right. I have known people who were on the inside in the clink, and I understand when they come out after being in there for a little while, it's like they're very uncomfortable. They don't know what to do
they
with
have to pay
themselves.
for their meals then.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
They're
true.
not used to that.
Yeah,
I
that's right.
understand too that many of the slaves were from because of war.
Mm.
So when they're released, they face more risks
Oh,
to
sure.
their lives. That's
Sure.
why they'd rather be staying
Right.
if the master is good.
Right.
Because they've provided everything.
Sure. And I think,
And
you
even
know,
safety.
Now that's the challenge, though, is to take these physical concepts that we're talking about, like, being incarcerated and suddenly having your freedom and having to take over your own life and make your own decisions and make good ones and, provide for yourself, or being in the military, and taking those physical, fleshly concepts and applying them in a spiritual realm and saying, my life is not my own. Now, how does that actually impact me on a daily basis? The only thing that I can think of, which I try to practice, is to wake up each morning and remind myself, today, Lord, help me to be your servant, to do things the way you want them done, and to do what you want done, and to help me to serve my clients, serve my boss with a heart that is true and faithful and honest, and what is it that he would want from you as a servant? And you've heard many times the famous Christian thing, be the best plumber you can be. And I think that there is actually a lot of truth in that. If you are being honest in your dealings, and we've spoken before about, and Keith is guilty of this, putting in an honest 8 hours worth of work.
And you work just as hard.
I'm messing with Keith.
You work just as hard when the boss is there as you do when he's not there.
Yes.
It's not like, okay, he's watching me.
Did you know? Did I tell you about the study that I read about? And I told my kids this, and they were like baffled. I read a study that was done, international study, that said that 30% of the workforce is actually fully hostile. Doesn't want to be there and will sabotage the workplace. 30%.
Wow.
30% of the workforce is actively engaged in sabotage. They're just there to collect their money and cause trouble. Another 56% are just there to collect a check. They don't want to cause no trouble, but they're just there to collect a check. That remaining little fraction there of like 15% of the people actually liked their job, wanted to be there, and were fulfilled by it.
And also like to help the boss.
And would take on responsibility, be honest, take a job that wasn't theirs, help somebody out.
Yeah.
I mean, that is do you believe that in our day that we're living in, 15% of the workforce in a multi-country study is actually there to be a help?
So biblically, we are to be that 15%.
We should definitely
In whatever
be that
we do.
in whatever we're doing.
Yep.
And you know what I tell my kids all the time? I said, look, man, with statistics like that, it doesn't take much to shine. If you just show up every day, and you show up on time, and you do your work,
Right.
and I've got this thing that I tell them, with accuracy, with completion, and with alacrity,
Yep.
you cannot lose. You will be promoted through the ranks. You'll be running that company in no time.
I became a believer after I retired, unfortunately. But Alan, I want to ask you a question. I think you said there's two masters.
Yeah.
Are you referring to God or the devil?
Mm.
Is that what you meant?
Yeah, yeah.
I thought so. I just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify that.
Right, yeah.
What's
It's either the world, alacrity. Oh, getting it done.
Oh, I know I should know.
Andale,
That's the one we have
andale.
trouble with.
Yeah. So that's what I teach my kids. If you do your work accurately, completely, and speedily, or without foot dragging,
Not begrudgingly.
not
In other
begrudgingly.
words, whatsoever you do heartily.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
do like as if Jesus
Exactly.
standing right there watching.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so I think that really is being a true servant.
Exactly.
Alacrity means, I thought, being happy and cheerful. And that's it here, brisk and cheerful readiness.
Yeah,
So it's not just being ready, but it's you have to
with a cheerful attitude.
cheerful
Yeah,
attitude.
right. Yeah, absolutely. So, my fine feathered friends, I am going to say that's all I have time for this evening. It was a delightful discussion. I thank you for taking part in it. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to add for the good of the order?
Just praise the Lord, it was good.
Amen.
Can you clarify? You say the Pope gets his authority supposedly from Peter because he was the disciple when Jesus said, "You now have the authority through me."
Right.
So it's taken from that.
Yeah, through their traditions, they call Peter the first bishop of Rome.
Why?
because according to their history, Peter came to Rome and became a bishop in Rome.
Not a
Of
pope.
course, he never did go to Rome.
Not the Pope, no. But see,
After the crucifixion.
yeah, and so, but as far as I know, historically, there was never any evidence that Peter went to Rome at all.
This was Peter getting the keys, and if you look at Renaissance paintings that the Catholics commissioned, and that's their authority is Christ handing the keys to Peter, and this is
the passage.
That was
Handing the
biblical.
keys
Yeah.
to
I mean,
Peter, the
yeah.
authority. And even there, if you look at an aerial view of Vatican City, the Vatican, it's shaped like a key.
Because of that.
Yeah, because they think that
That's
Peter
where they
got
got
the
their
keys to
authority
heaven. You know, he became the first bishop of Rome, and that therefore they trace their lineage of authority to
Right.
Peter directly. And this statement that Yeshua is giving Peter authority.
And they believe the Pope has supernatural powers.
Yeah.
If the Pope says something, God
He's
has
not.
to
Completely,
listen.
completely
yeah,
absurd.
he is. In fact, if you
What
want
has
to
he
look
done
at
that's
it,
supernatural?
yeah, nothing as far as I know.
There's
But if you
that.
look at it, you can actually interpret it this way: if what the Pope is saying is true, he has the authority of Messiah.
Yeah.
If you go with, he's always claiming. He is the
He's
vicar
like
of
an
Christ.
he's like an anti-Messiah,
Well,
especially if he is going against the Torah, and he is violating any commands of the Torah or sets aside any commands of the Torah. That'd be a perfect. That's I think part of the reason why so many Protestants have said that the Pope is the Antichrist for generations, millennia. So, an interesting side discussion.
He just came out with a statement, the Pope, that said, we accept all people, Muslims, Jews, Christians, except for fundamental Christians. They are not welcome. They are wrong. That was his statement.
I saw his most recent statement.
So we're fundamental Christians, basically.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm
That's what
referring
we
to.
are, right?
Well, he's still trying to bring us back under his fold because we're still rebelling. You know how Michael Barud likes to
We're
say that
rebellious Catholics.
we're still protesting Catholics, and that's actually true to a large extent. That is actually true, and he wants us back under his authority.
It's Catholicism is becoming a cult.
Oh yeah,
The
absolutely.
largest religion, the largest following in the world, I think,
Yeah.
is Catholicism. Still.
Yeah. I think if you look at today's modern definition of a cult, and you were to compare that with especially the church in the medieval period, that's some serious cult-like stuff. Absolutely. So,
Even before.
no question about it.
It started in the 300s.
Yeah, but see, the papacy lost its power quite a while ago under Charlemagne.
Renaissance
I think it was
Oh,
Charlemagne
yeah.
who basically
Oh,
stripped
Peter.
him of his power.
I think that's
Well, wasn't that when
Apart.
it split, the
Yeah.
east and west?
Yeah.
And Charlemagne was opposite of Rome.
Yes. Yeah. So sometime here,
Charlemagne.
not too long ago, history, the
He was
Pope, the
French.
papacy really lost their authority, and secular authority, and that that really changed things. But you and I have no idea what it used to be like. The church under the Catholic Church had
They could keep you from
control
going
over
to heaven.
everything. They could.
Uh-huh.
They could keep you from going
That's
to
all right,
heaven.
you can buy
Yeah, right.
indulgences and get.
They're keeping themselves from that.
I know.
Yeah.
A
But
pass. all.
Yeah.
people were terrified.
Yeah. People were
Because the
definitely
Catholics say-
terrified.
Not were, still are.
Some of them still are. That is very
Oh,
true.
yeah.
Very
Go
true.
to a Catholic church one time.
I've only been to
Nowadays.
One.
Go to an
Now
Irish
it-
Catholic church.
An Irish Catholic church.
No, but evolving into completely absurd.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me,
Absolutely. I agree.
Well, it's absurd to us, but I'll tell you what, it's scary real to them.
Yeah, that's true.
They don't dare even question. My grandmother
Right.
shook, literally shook when
no
Daddy
question.
would try to tell her about
Well,
the Lord Jesus and about
And LDS as well, along those parallels, that you don't dare question it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good discussion tonight, you guys. Let us pray.